Hello, welcome to Phantom Homicide.
And welcome! Today we're diving deep into a case that's, well, frankly, it's chilling to its core.
Absolutely. We're looking at a criminal whose methods were so audacious, so
Well,
systematic, really.
George Joseph Smith. You might know him better as the Brides in the Bath murderer.
That name itself, it sounds like something out of, I don't know, a Penny Dreadful or a Gothic novel.
It does, but the reality is starkly modern, almost clinical in its cruelty. We're talking about a man who seemed to perfect murder as a financial transaction.
Designed to look like a perfect accident.
A terrible, tragic accident, a healthy woman drowning in her bath.
But then it happened again.
And again, 3 times, between 1912 and 1914. That repetition, well, that's what turns tragedy into something else entirely.
Into a chilling mathematical certainty, as the intro puts it.
Exactly. And that repetition, that pattern, it's not just the key to the crime, it was ultimately his undoing.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to really unpack this. We need to understand Smith himself, this serial bigamist, this con artist turned killer.
We need to look at the pattern, the meticulous details of his crimes, especially these 3 drownings.
And crucially, the groundbreaking forensic science that exposed him. Because this case, it really changed things, didn't it?
Well, absolutely. We're talking about Sir Bernard Spilsbury and how he took what Smith himself called a phenomenal coincidence.
Phenomenal coincidence.
Right.
What a phrase.
Right. Spilsbury turned that into undeniable proof of murder. And the legal side, precedent it set, is huge.
So the central mystery, the hook for you listening is this. How could 3 healthy women, all recently married to the same man, though under different names, how could they all accidentally drown in a bathtub with no obvious signs of a struggle, all within about 2 years?
It seems impossible. Let's start digging into the man behind the myth.
Okay, let's trace the origins of this predator. George Joseph Smith. Where did he come from?
He was born January 11, 1872, Bethnal Green, East London. His father was actually an insurance agent.
An insurance agent. Wow, the irony there is pretty thick, considering.
Considering his later career choice, yes, it's quite something. But Smith didn't follow that path. His path diverged very early on.
Yeah, his criminal record started incredibly young. Age 9.
9 years old. Sent to a reformatory school down in Gravesend in Kent. And he was there for 7 years.
7 years in that kind of institution at that age. You have to wonder what that does to a person.
Well, these places were meant to reform through pretty harsh discipline, but often, let's be honest, they just functioned as, well, advanced training grounds for crime.
He learned the system, maybe? How to operate within it or outside it?
Perhaps. He certainly learned contempt for the law. His young adulthood was just this cycle, in and out of prison.
Petty stuff, mostly.
Yeah.
Theft, fraud, larceny.
Mm-hmm.
The outline mentions bicycle stealing.
Yeah, bicycle stealing pops up. Common crime, then. Easy target. He wasn't doing long stretches, just enough to kind of refine his approach.
And it seems the approach he refined wasn't just stealing things, but stealing lives, or at least livelihoods. He moved on to people.
Precisely. He figured out that the real money wasn't in stolen goods, but in manipulating vulnerable people, specifically women.
Lonely women, often spinsters, maybe middle-aged, with savings or property.
Think about the time period. Early 20th century Britain, the social pressure on women, especially unmarried women over 30, was immense.
Right, and if they had a bit of an inheritance or savings tucked away.
They were prime targets for a certain kind of predator, someone charming, someone promising marriage, security.
Which brings us to his actual marriage, his only legal one.
Yes, Caroline Beatrice Thornhill. He married her in 1898. She was a domestic servant. He used an alias, of course, George Oliver Love.
George Oliver Love. Charming.
It was anything but charming for Caroline. This marriage set a horrifying template. Abuse, manipulation.
He didn't just marry her. He used her, didn't he? Forced her to steal.
Yes, he made her get jobs using forged references he provided, targeting houses where she could steal more effectively.
That's incredibly calculating.
And when she eventually got caught in Worthing and sent to prison, Smith, he just vanished. Left her to face the music alone.
Cut his losses. Classic predator move.
But Caroline, she actually played a key role later, didn't she?
She did. After she was released, she came back briefly and testified against him. That led to him getting a 2-year sentence in 1901.
And then she did the smart thing.
Emigrated to Canada. Put an ocean between them. Good for her.
Absolutely. But that legal marriage, it had a lasting consequence for Smith.
Because divorce was difficult and expensive back then, especially for his class.
Exactly. He remained legally married to Caroline, which meant every single marriage he contracted after that.
Was bigamy a crime in itself?
A crime, yes, but one he seemed quite comfortable committing repeatedly. It was almost the least of his worries later on.
So after that 1901 conviction, he gets out, and the real spree begins.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Between about 1908 and 1914, the sources say no fewer than 7 bigamous marriages.
7 in 6 years.
At least 7 that we know of, using all sorts of names. Henry Williams, George Rose Smith, Charles Oliver James, sometimes even his real name, George Smith.
How did he even manage it? The descriptions say he wasn't particularly handsome. Bit of a ginger mustache, apparently.
Not handsome, maybe not physically imposing, but charismatic. Witnesses consistently mentioned his eyes.
Ah, yes, the dark and piercing eyes, with that wonderful power of fascination.
Sounds almost hypnotic the way some described it, like he could rob you of your will. He was clearly a master of psychological manipulation.
Selling a fantasy, security, companionship, love, to women who desperately wanted it.
And he knew where to find them. Seaside towns were a favorite hunting ground, promenades, church chapels, respectable places where lonely women might be found.
Targeting a specific type, middle-aged, spinster, a bit of money.
And the scam itself was almost brutally efficient. Marry quickly, gain access to the money, and then disappear.
Like that story about Sarah Faulkner. That one really stands out for its sheer nerve.
It really does. This was 1909. He marries her as George Rose, gets about 350 pounds in cash and jewelry off her pretty quickly.
And then the getaway plan.
He takes her for a nice day out to the National Gallery in London.
Very cultured.
Pretends he needs the loo, excuses himself. She waits. And waits.
Well, he's gone back to their hotel.
Exactly. Packed up
Yeah.
her remaining clothes, grabbed any last bit of cash, and just vanished, leaving her stranded at the National Gallery.
Imagine that feeling. Staring at a masterpiece, slowly realizing your new husband has just robbed you blind and abandoned you. The level of contempt is just staggering.
It really is. These women were just means to an end for him. Disposable.
But there was one woman who wasn't disposable, seemingly. Edith Pegler.
Ah, Edith. The anomaly in the pattern. He married her in 1908. She answered his ad for a housekeeper.
And unlike the others, he kept coming back to her, right?
Yeah, he'd vanish for months at a time, claiming he was off on business trips.
Which really meant he was off marrying and robbing someone else.
Precisely. But he always returned to Edith, often with cash, spinning these tales about selling antiques, even mentioning a Turner painting once.
Their relationship lasted through all his other scams for about 7 years. Why? Why her? She wasn't rich, like the later victims?
Well, one theory, as the outline notes, is about class. She came from a similar background to Smith. Lower middle class, working class perhaps.
So maybe he felt comfortable, didn't have to put on such an act, no feelings of inferiority.
Possibly. But the more likely and frankly more chilling explanation is purely practical.
She was his home base.
His stable anchor. A place to return to, maybe someone to launder the money through. She was functional. His cash cow.
So in a twisted way, her lack of significant independent wealth might have saved her life.
It seems that way. The women he just robbed and left, they lost their savings, but they lived. Edith kept her life, possibly because she served a different purpose.
But his purpose was shifting, wasn't it? Simple theft wasn't enough anymore.
No, he was getting greedy. The sums available from theft were relatively small. The real money, the life-changing sums, were in inheritances and life insurance.
And accessing those required something more permanent than a quick marriage and disappearance?
It required death. He was about to cross the line from con man to killer.
Okay, so the transition to murder, it seems directly linked to the potential payout, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The women he chose to kill weren't like Edith Pegler or the ones he just robbed. They had significant assets, money tied up in trusts, substantial inheritances.
The kind of money you couldn't just pocket and run off with. You needed the legal right to it.
Which meant becoming the grieving widower. Permanence was key, even if that permanence only lasted a few days after the wedding.
Let's break down the timeline of the murders. Victim number 1, Bessie Mundy.
Bessie, she was 33, a spinster, met Smith using the alias Henry Williams in Clifton, Bristol. And crucially, she had money.
A lot of money for the time. 2,500 pounds inheritance from her father, a bank manager, held in trust.
That's equivalent to, what, over 200,000 pounds today? A massive sum. That was the prize Smith had his eye on.
He married her in August 1910. But it wasn't straightforward initially, was it?
No, he actually left her at first. Only managed to get about 150 pounds off her. And his excuse for leaving was just unbelievably cruel.
Accused her of having a venereal disease.
Yes, just vile. But he couldn't let go of that 2,500 pounds. And then, incredibly, about 18 months later...
He just bumps into her on the street. In Weston-super-Mare.
Pure chance, it seems. And somehow, this charismatic monster talks his way back in, convinces her the whole VD thing was a terrible mistake, a misunderstanding.
And she took him back. It speaks volumes about how isolated she must have felt.
It really does. And once they were reunited, the plan kicked into high gear. Almost immediately, they drew up mutual wills.
Naming each other as beneficiary. Her estate was worth $2,579. He stood to inherit everything.
And less than a week after those wills were signed, Bessie was dead. July 13th, 1912.
The setup for the murder is where we see the system emerge. Renting the house in Herne Bay.
And the bathtub. This detail is so bizarre and revealing. He buys a new cast iron bathtub.
Not just buys it, he makes Bessie haggle the price down. To £1.17.
Think about that. He's planning her murder, and he's haggling over pennies for the instrument he's going to use, the cheapness, the avarice. It's astounding.
It shows his mindset completely. Maximize profit, minimize cost, even in murder.
And then the medical prep. He takes her to a local doctor, a young one, twice, claims she suffers from epileptic fits.
Even though she denied it.
She denied it, but she deferred to her husband, so the doctor notes it down. The stage is set for the accident.
So the day comes. Smith claims he went out to buy fish for dinner, comes back.
Finds her drowned in the bath, calls the doctor.
And the doctor, remembering the epilepsy Smith mentioned,
signs the death certificate, death by misadventure due to a seizure, case closed. Smith inherits the money.
The aftermath, though, that's almost as horrifying as the murder itself.
It really is. He gets this substantial inheritance, over 2,500 pounds. And what does he do?
Gives her a pauper's funeral, the cheapest possible burial.
And that bathtub, the one he haggled over.
He took it back to the ironmonger.
Returned the slightly used bathtub for a full refund. £1.17 back in his pocket. Just unbelievable callousness.
But in his cheapness, he left a clue. Something the doctor noted at the time but didn't realize the significance of.
Yes. Bessie Mundy was found clutching a bar of soap tightly in her right hand.
That tightly clenched soap. We'll come back to that. It becomes critical later.
So Smith gets away with it, pocketed a fortune, refined his method. He waits over a year, then strikes again.
Victim number 2, Alice Burnham, December 1913.
Alice was younger, 25, a nurse. She had some savings, not a huge fortune like Bessie, but enough. He married her using his real name, this time George Smith, November 1913.
Her family didn't trust him, did they?
No, her father especially, sensed something was wrong, something evil apparently. He actually kicked Smith out before the wedding.
But Alice married him anyway.
She did, and the pattern repeats. First, the financial groundwork. Insured her life for 500 pounds.
Then the location. A honeymoon in Blackpool. But not just any boarding house.
No, he specifically checked out the accommodation first, inspected the bathtub. It had to be right for his method.
The meticulousness is creepy.
And the medical alibi again. Took her to a doctor, complaining she had headaches, establishing a reason for a potential collapse or faint.
And this time, there was a witness. Sort of. The landlady, Mrs. Crossley.
Right. She plays an important role unintentionally. She noticed water dripping through her ceiling before Smith conveniently appeared downstairs in her kitchen.
Trying to establish his alibi, talk to her about buying eggs or something.
Exactly. He goes back upstairs, raises the alarm, discovers the body.
But his reaction, or lack of it, raised eyebrows, didn't it?
Yes, the doctor and others criticized him. He hadn't pulled her out of the water, hadn't tried to drain the bath, his excuse. It hadn't occurred to him.
Chillingly detached. And again, the cheap funeral.
Insisted on it being done quickly and cheaply. Apparently told the undertaker, when they are dead, they are done with. Just ice cold.
So that's two. Two identical accidents. And he still wasn't done.
No. 1 year later, almost to the day, December 1914, victim number 3, Margaret Elizabeth Lofty.
Margaret Lofty. 38 years old. A clergyman's daughter. Described as timid, maybe desperate to marry.
He met her in Clifton again, married her in Bath, alias this time, John Lloyd.
And this one was fast. Shockingly fast.
Unbelievably fast. They got married and she was dead the next day.
Wow.
Just hours before she died, she made a will naming him the sole heir, and she'd just taken out a 700-pound life insurance policy.
The financial motive couldn't be clearer.
Yeah, and the medical prep.
Done on their wedding night. Took her to a doctor, complaining she had a headache, maybe flu symptoms.
Yeah.
Laid the groundwork again.
The scene this time was Highgate, London, and the landlady there heard things.
Yes, sounds from the bathroom splashing. Then disturbingly, the sound of wet hands beating against the side of the bath.
Like a struggle. We're trying to get out.
Possibly. Followed by silence, and then a sigh.
Then the music. This detail is just bone-chilling. Immediately after those sounds stopped, the landlady heard Smith start playing the harmonium in the sitting room.
Playing a hymn, wasn't it?
Nearer, my God, to thee, creating this perfect timed audio alibi, proving he was calmly playing music while his wife drowned just feet away.
It's almost theatrical in its depravity.
And the discovery followed the usual script. He leaves the house briefly, comes back, knocks because he's forgotten his key after supposedly going out to buy tomatoes for her supper.
Finds the door locked from the inside, eventually gets in.
And discovers her dead in the bath. Another tragic accident.
3 times. The same story. It's almost like he was daring someone to notice.
Then finally someone did. His lack of originality, his sheer repetition, that was the fatal flaw.
So the pattern finally gets noticed. But how? It wasn't the police initially, was it?
No, it was the press, funnily enough, and vigilant readers. Smith thought using different names and locations would keep the cases separate. He underestimated the power of newsprint.
Specifically, the News of the World. They ran a story about Margaret Lofty's death.
Right, describing the circumstances. Newly married woman, drowned in her bath, apparently an accident.
And this story was read by people connected to the second victim, Alice Burnham.
Exactly. 2 key people. Joseph Crossley, who was Alice's landlord in Blackpool where she died.
The one who saw the water dripping through the ceiling.
And Charles Burnham, Alice's father, the one who disliked Smith from the start.
And they both read this account of Margaret Lofty's death.
And the similarities just jumped off the page. Despite the husband having a different name, John Lloyd versus George Smith, the circumstances were identical. A newlywed drowning in a bath.
So they both contacted the police independently.
They did. Wrote letters, pointing out the disturbing parallels, and that's what finally linked the cases.
Which landed this whole mess on the desk of Divisional Detective Inspector Arthur Neal at Scotland Yard.
A complex case, especially given the context. This is early 1915. Britain's deep in the First World War. Resources are stretched thin.
But this case, these repeated, bizarre deaths, it was clearly a priority.
Absolutely. And D.I. Neal was the man for the job. He was methodical. He started visiting the locations.
And he noticed the bathtubs.
Yes. He paid attention to the physical details. Margaret Lofty's tub in Highgate, he measured it. Only about 50 inches long at the bottom, maybe 66 inches near the top. 5 feet, give or take.
Pretty small, especially for an adult woman to just accidentally drown in without any sign of illness or intoxication.
Neal intuitively felt something was wrong there. It suggested either impossibility for an accident or some kind of external force was needed.
He also looked beyond the physical scene, didn't he? At the husband's behavior.
Yes. The lack of grief shown by Lloyd after Margaret's death. The insistence on a cheap, quick funeral.
And the rush to cash in. Trying to collect on the will and that 700-pound insurance policy almost immediately.
The financial motive was just screamingly obvious to Neal. He quickly put together that John Lloyd, the husband of Margaret Lofty, was the same man as George Smith, husband of Alice Burnham.
And he found out about the will Margaret signed just hours before she died, and her withdrawing all her savings. The pattern was solidifying.
Okay, so Neal has the pattern. He knows Lloyd is Smith. Now he needs to find the man himself. He can't just wait for him to strike again.
So he uses Smith's own greed against him, sets a trap.
A brilliant move. The Yorkshire Insurance Company, who held Margaret Lofty's 700-pound policy, naturally made inquiries after her sudden death.
Standard procedure.
So Neal tells the coroner involved, Dr. Bates, to issue a favorable report. Basically signal that the death looked accidental and the insurance payout would likely proceed.
Gambling that Smith, or Lloyd, would hear about this and come forward to collect the money he thought was his.
The bait worked perfectly. February 1st, 1915. Smith, still acting as John Lloyd, walks into the solicitor's office in Shepherd's Bush to follow up on the insurance claim.
And Neal and his team were waiting for him.
Right there, Neal approaches him, asks, "Are you John Lloyd?" Smith says yes. Then Neal drops the other name. "Are you George Smith?"
And Smith denies it.
Vehemently denies being Smith. He probably figured he could handle a bigamy charge for the Lloyd marriage, but admitting he was also George Smith linked him directly to Alice Burnham's death, too.
So Neil charges him, but strategically.
Yes, initially just with bigamy relating to the Lofty marriage and making a false entry on the marriage certificate. Faced with that specific charge, Smith finally cracks.
Admits his real name is George Joseph Smith.
That was the key moment. He connected the identities himself. Lloyd was Smith.
And his reaction when confronted with the two identical deaths, Alice's and Margaret's.
Pure, calculated arrogance. He told the police, essentially, yeah, it looks bad, but it's just incredibly bad luck for me. He called it a phenomenal coincidence.
Phenomenal coincidence. He actually used those words.
And dismissed it all as an irony of fate, just brazen.
But the coincidences weren't over yet, were they? The net was tightening further.
Not at all. His arrest and the sensational Brides in the Bath headlines that followed reached Herne Bay,
Where Bessie Mundy died back in 1912.
Exactly. The chief of police there read the stories, recognized the M.O., remembered the case of a Henry Williams whose wife Bessie had drowned in the bath after supposedly having a fit.
And he contacted D.I. Neal.
He did. Suddenly, Neil didn't just have 2 linked deaths. He had 3. 3 aliases, 3 dead brides, 3 bathtubs, an undeniable, deadly system.
Okay, so Neal has Smith in custody. He has the pattern of 3 incredibly similar deaths.
Okay.
But he still has a major problem.
Proof of murder? How do you actually prove these weren't accidents, however unlikely? There were no obvious signs of violence.
The official verdicts were death by misadventure, or similar. Smith claimed epilepsy, fainting, things that could plausibly happen in a bath.
This is where the case moves into truly groundbreaking territory.
Right.
Enter Sir Bernard Spilsbury.
The legendary pathologist, already famous for the Dr. Crippen case.
Yes, the Home Office brought him in. His task was immense. Find scientific proof of homicide where none seemed to exist.
Which meant going back to the victims themselves. Exhumations were ordered.
All 3 bodies, Bessie Mundy, Alice Burnham, Margaret Lofty, were exhumed and examined by Spilsbury.
And the findings initially seemed to support Smith, didn't they?
To an extent, yes. Drowning was confirmed as the cause of death in all 3. But crucially, Spilsbury noted the almost complete lack of injury. Just a tiny bruise on Margaret Lofty's elbow, a couple of microscopic marks elsewhere. Nothing consistent with a violent struggle.
So on the surface, it still looked like it could have been an accident, a fit, a faint.
But Spilsbury wasn't just looking at the surface. He started applying logic, physics, physiology to Smith's explanations. He started with the epilepsy claim for Bessie Mundy.
The first victim. Smith said she had fits.
Right. But Spilsbury knew about epilepsy. He knew the first phase of a grand mal seizure, the tonic phase, causes the body to go rigid, stiffen, and extend.
Okay. So how does that disprove the drowning?
You combine that medical fact with the physical evidence. Bessie Mundy was quite tall for the time, 5'7.5"
And the bathtub in Herne Bay.
was only 5 feet long. Remember D.I. Neal measuring these things?
Right, the small tubs.
So Spilsbury reasoned, if Bessie, a tall woman, had a seizure in that short bath, her rigid, extended body would have naturally pushed her up the sloping end of the tub.
Her head would have been forced above the water level.
Precisely. It was physically impossible for her to have submerged herself during an epileptic fit in that specific bathtub. Smith's primary explanation for the first death was scientifically debunked by the plumbing.
That's brilliant. Using simple physics and measurements.
But Spilsbury wasn't finished. He then focused on that other small detail from Bessie's death.
The bar of soap, clutched tightly in her hand.
Why was that so important? Spilsbury argued that if someone faints or drowns gradually, their muscles relax. They lose consciousness slowly.
They'd drop the soap.
Exactly. The fact that Bessie was gripping it so tightly suggested death was incredibly sudden, almost instantaneous.
So sudden that the natural muscle contraction of gripping the soap passed directly into rigor mortis, the stiffness of death, before she could relax her hand.
That was his interpretation. It pointed away from a slow faint or a seizure recovery gone wrong, and towards a sudden, shocking, paralyzing event.
Okay, so if it wasn't a fit, and it wasn't a faint, and there was no struggle, how did Smith kill them? What was the actual mechanism?
This was Spilsbury's key deduction. He theorized it must have been incredibly fast and rely on surprise. He pictured Smith approaching his wife in the bath.
Maybe pretending to be playful, affectionate. It was their honeymoon period, after all, or shortly after marriage.
Exactly, lulling her into a false sense of security. Then, Spilsbury proposed, Smith grabbed her by the feet or ankles.
And pulled upwards, sharply.
Violently upwards. The effect would be to lever her body, instantly plunging her head and shoulders beneath the water before she could react.
A sudden, unexpected submersion.
And that sudden, massive rush of water into the nose and throat, Spilsbury argued, would trigger an involuntary physiological response.
What kind of response?
Something called vagal inhibition or reflex asphyxia. Basically, the shock to the vagus nerve causes instantaneous loss of consciousness, maybe even cardiac arrest. It paralyzes the victim immediately.
Which would explain everything. The lack of struggle, the absence of injuries, the speed of death suggested by the soap.
It all fit. It was a plausible mechanism for murder that left almost no trace.
But it was still a theory. How could they possibly prove it?
They needed to test it. And D.I. Neal authorized a now famous and frankly quite dangerous reconstruction.
They used one of the actual bathtubs, didn't they?
Yes. They brought Margaret Lofty's bathtub, the small one from Highgate, right into the police station.
And they needed a volunteer.
An experienced female police diver, someone used to being underwater and roughly the same size as the victims, bravely volunteered.
What happened when they tested it?
First, Neal tried the obvious method, trying to forcibly push her head underwater.
Which resulted in?
A massive struggle, exactly what you'd expect. She fought back, thrashed around. That clearly wasn't how Smith did it.
So then they tried Spilsbury's theory. The foot pull method.
Neal waited, then suddenly grabbed her feet and yanked them upwards, pulling her head under the water without warning.
And the result?
Horrifyingly effective. Even though this woman knew an attack was coming, the sudden shock of the water rushing into her airways caused her to black out instantly. She reflexively inhaled water.
She actually lost consciousness.
Yes. They had to pull her out immediately and work to revive her for over half an hour. It was incredibly dangerous.
What did she remember?
When she finally came around, she said she remembered nothing after that initial shocking rush of water. Complete blank, despite knowing it was a test.
Wow. That confirmed it then. The surprise was the weapon. Spilsbury's theory held up.
It did. They now had the man, the pattern, the motive, and crucially, a scientifically plausible and demonstrated mechanism for murder.
So, armed with Spilsbury's findings and the evidence of the pattern, Smith goes to trial.
Yes, June 1915, the Old Bailey. He's formally charged with all 3 murders, but the trial itself focuses just on the first one, Bessie Mundy. That was standard procedure, then you couldn't usually try someone for multiple unrelated murders at once.
But the prosecution needed to bring in the other deaths, didn't they? To show it wasn't just a one-off freak accident with Bessie.
Absolutely critical. And this is where the major legal precedent was set. The prosecution, led by Archibald Bodkin, argued successfully that the evidence relating to Alice Burnham and Margaret Lofty should be admissible in the Bessie Mundy trial.
Why? What was the justification?
To establish system. To show that Bessie's death wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a deliberate, repeated pattern of criminal behavior by Smith. It countered his defense of phenomenal coincidence.
And the judge allowed it.
He did, and that ruling was huge. It essentially established that a clear pattern of similar crimes could be used as evidence to prove intent in a specific charge. It's a cornerstone of how such cases are prosecuted even today.
So the jury heard about all 3 deaths, the similar circumstances, the wills, the insurance.
Everything. And then they heard from Spilsbury. His testimony was apparently devastating.
Did he demonstrate the bathtub theory in court?
He did, meticulously explaining the reflex asphyxia. They even brought the actual bathtub into a private room for the jury to see the demonstration with a model. Smith apparently just sat there, white-faced, silent.
What could the defense possibly say? Sir Edward Marshall Hall was his barrister, a famous defender.
Marshall Hall tried his best. He attacked the Spilsbury theory, focusing on the soap again. He argued if she was being murdered, surely her instinct would be to drop the soap and fight, not clench it tighter.
But Spilsbury's explanation of instantaneous shock and rigor mortis must have countered that.
It seems so. Marshall Hall also, apparently, privately floated a more outlandish theory.
What was that?
He suggested Smith might have been some kind of hypnotist, like Svengali from the popular novel Trilby, that he somehow compelled the women to drown themselves or sign the wills under hypnotic suggestion.
Wow. That sounds desperate. Trying to find any explanation other than Spilsbury's straightforward, brutal mechanics.
It was dramatic, but ultimately the physical and pattern evidence was just too strong. The hypnosis idea didn't stick.
So the jury goes out.
And they weren't out for long. Reports vary slightly, but somewhere between 20 and 22 minutes. That's incredibly fast for a murder trial.
The verdict.
Guilty. Guilty of the murder of Bessie Mundy.
Did Smith react?
Oh, he reacted during the trial itself, apparently shouting out things like, "I am no murderer, although I may be a bit peculiar."
A bit peculiar. Understatement of the century.
And also, "You may as well hang me at once, the way you were going on." He protested his innocence, maintained the coincidence line, right to the very end.
But the verdict stood. The sentence was death.
He was hanged by John Ellis, a well-known executioner at Maidstone Prison. August 13th, 1915. He was 43 years old.
The end of George Joseph Smith. But not the end of the story, really. The legacy of this case is enormous.
It really is. The Brides in the Bath murders became instantly infamous. They entered popular culture almost immediately and have stayed there. The case is still vividly alive, as one source puts it.
It heavily influenced crime fiction, didn't it? The Golden Age writer.
Hugely. Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, they all riffed on it. Christie supposedly said Smith's mistake was being unoriginal. If he'd varied his methods, he might have escaped. Allingham wrote a short story, 3 is a lucky number, clearly inspired by Smith, but cleverly gives the final bride the agency to turn the tables.
And it even bled into political commentary, comparing Smith to Hitler.
Yeah, Harold Nicholson, the diplomat and writer, used Smith's relentless pattern of acquiring and disposing wives for money as a metaphor for Hitler's aggressive expansionism in the 1930s. It shows how deeply the case entered the public consciousness.
And professionally, for forensic science.
It cemented Sir Bernard Spilsbury's reputation, made him almost a celebrity pathologist. It proved that rigorous science, physiology, physics, careful observation could solve murders even when the killer tried very hard to leave no trace. It was a massive win for forensic investigation.
So looking back at the whole thing, what stands out most?
For me, it's the sheer calculated coldness of Smith, the systematic approach, turning marriage and murder into a business model, and his utter cheapness, like haggling over the price of the murder weapon and then returning it for a refund.
Yeah, that detail is just unforgettable. It highlights the banality beneath the monstrousness.
But also the response. The meticulous police work by D.I. Neal, patiently piecing together the pattern across different towns and names.
In Spilsbury, the application of science to unravel a seemingly perfect crime. It really was a turning point.
They didn't just catch a killer. They fundamentally changed how investigators looked at serial crimes and how forensic evidence could be used in court.
And as a final thought, that detail about the hymn, Margaret Lofty's landlady, hearing "Nearer, My God, to Thee," playing on the harmonium right after the sounds of drowning stopped.
It's just so incredibly dark. Was it just him coolly establishing his alibi, proving he was elsewhere?
Or was there something else? Some twisted sense of occasion? A final mocking gesture? We can only guess at a level of psychopathy involved.
A chilling question to leave our listeners with. The depths of his callousness are almost unimaginable.
Okay, so we hope you liked our today's discussion. For more such discussions, subscribe to our channel, Phantom Homicide.